The air in an emergency room on Christmas Eve doesn't smell like pine or peppermint. It smells like ozone, industrial bleach, and the metallic tang of blood. My name is Clara Vance. I'm 34 years old, a senior ER nurse, and the widow of a man who left behind a legacy of secrets I was too exhausted to uncover, until the night the world broke. I want you to imagine the weight of a human heart under your palms. I was chest deep in a cardiac arrest in Bay 4 of Riverside Memorial, the rhythmic thump of my compressions the only thing standing between a grandfather and the void. Sweat was stinging my eyes. The monitors were screaming a flat, high-pitched monotone. Outside the sliding glass doors, the Maine coast was being swallowed by a nor'easter, snow piling up against the ambulance bay like white ash. I was supposed to be at my own kitchen table. I had set it for 2. Maya, my 10-year-old, had spent the afternoon wrapping every branch of our crooked 5-foot tree in silver tinsel until it looked like a disco ball having a midlife crisis. We had a lasagna cooling on the counter because she decided turkey was boring. I never argued with that logic. Then the phone rang. Greg, our charge nurse, had collapsed. We were shorthanded. The plea in Tanya's voice wasn't an ask, it was a desperate prayer. I did what I've done for a decade. I triaged my own life. I called my mother-in-law, Clara Vance. The Vances are the kind of people who own the history books in this town, old money, stone manor houses, and a brand of warmth that always has a high interest rate attached. Of course, Clara, Eleanor had said, her voice like honey poured over gravel. Bring Maya to the manor. We're just sitting down to the roast. I knelt in front of Maya in our foyer, straightening the collar of her red velvet dress. I handed her a gift box she'd painted herself, gold and green, to give to her grandmother. Grandma Eleanor is going to look after you tonight, okay? Mom has to go save a life. Maya hugged me, her breath a white cloud in the freezing air. Come back before midnight, Mom, she whispered. I promised I would. It was the first lie of many that night. The shift was a gauntlet of human misery. A 3-car pileup, a toddler with a febrile seizure, and the crushing weight of Greg's empty chair. At 10:17 p.m., I finally found 90 seconds to breathe behind a supply cart. I pulled out my phone. 3 missed calls from Maya. 1 text, sent nearly an hour ago, Mom, please come get me. No emojis. Maya always used emojis. I dialed her back instantly. It wasn't Maya who picked up. Clara, dear, settle down, Eleanor's voice was a calm, measured stroke. Maya's just being a bit dramatic. She's playing with her cousins now. Focus on your patients, honey. The line went dead before I could ask to speak to her. I stared at the screen, a cold knot forming in my stomach. It wasn't until 12:40 a.m., as I was peeling off my scrubs in the locker room, that I noticed the attachment on Maya's text. I zoomed in on the dark, blurry photo taken from a low angle. I saw the edge of a mahogany dining chair. I saw the hem of Maya's red dress. And hanging around her neck by a piece of rough twine was a slab of cardboard. The writing was in thick, black Sharpie, the same elegant cursive Eleanor used for her Christmas cards. It read, Family Disgrace. I was in my car before the locker room door had even finished swinging shut. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just drove into the heart of the storm, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, realizing that the family I had spent years trying to please had just declared war on a 10-year-old girl. The Vance Manor sat on the edge of the cliffs like a predator waiting for the tide. It was dark when I pulled into the gravel drive at 1:20 a.m. Every other house on the coast had their lights blinking in the snow, but the manor was a tomb of gray stone and black windows. The party was over. The evidence, they thought, had been tucked away. I didn't knock. I pounded. When Eleanor opened the door in her silk bathrobe, she looked at me with a tired, condescending pity. Clara, for heaven's sake, the child was exhausted. We put her down an hour ago. I didn't wait for an invitation. I stepped past her, the smell of expensive cinnamon and wood smoke hitting me like a physical blow. I found Maya on the love seat in the far corner of the dining room. The table had been cleared of its silver and fine china, polished back to a high, uncaring shine. My daughter was awake, her eyes swollen, her hands trembling as they rested on that piece of cardboard in her lap. I knelt in front of her. The twine had left a raw, red line against the pale skin of her neck. I lifted the sign over her head, my fingers grazing the cardboard. Family disgrace. I folded it twice and slid it into my coat pocket. Let's go, Maya, I said. My voice was a flat, terrifying monotone. It was my code blue voice. Eleanor stood in the doorway, her arms folded. She needs structure, Clara. She made a scene at dinner. She told a lie so egregious it embarrassed your brother-in-law in front of the entire parish. We had to teach her that words have consequences. I didn't look at Eleanor. I knew that if I did, the ER nurse would vanish and the mother would take over. I couldn't afford to lose control yet. I picked Maya up, she felt like she was made of glass and ice, and carried her out to the car. Maya didn't speak for the first 10 minutes of the drive. The heater was blasting, the vents pointed right at her, but she was still shaking. Then, somewhere near the old lighthouse, she started talking in a voice so small I had to strain to hear it over the wind. I heard Uncle Silas on the phone last week, Mom. In the hallway at Grandma's. She pulled out a loose thread on her red dress. He was talking about my blue account. The one Grandpa Julian set up for my school. He said he was reallocating it. He said he needed it to cover the house taxes. I felt my heart skip a beat. Silas was the successful one, the man who managed the Vance real estate holdings. At dinner, Aunt Sarah was talking about Silas's new boat, Maya continued, her voice trembling. And I just asked. I asked if the boat was made of my school money. I wasn't trying to be mean. I just wanted to know. And then? I asked, my throat tightening. Grandma got so quiet. She said I was a liar. She said the Vance family doesn't tolerate liars. She went to the garage and got the box, she made me stand there, Mom. She told everyone I wasn't allowed to eat until I apologized. She made me wear the sign so I'd remember what I was. Did anyone help you? Uncle Silas laughed. He said I had too much of my mother's imagination. Then they went to the parlor for brandy. They left me there, Mom. In the dark. I pulled the car onto the shoulder of the road. I unbuckled my seatbelt, pulled her into my lap, and held her until the shaking stopped. You are not a liar, Maya, I whispered. You are the bravest Vance I've ever met. When we got home, I tucked her into bed and read until her breathing finally leveled out. Then I walked to the hall closet. On the top shelf, behind the extra blankets, was a white banker's box I hadn't touched in 3 years. The one labeled, Julian, Private. I'd shoved it up there a week after the funeral, terrified of the grief. But tonight, I didn't feel grief. I felt like a hunter who had finally found the scent. I pulled the box down and set it on the kitchen table. The kitchen clock was ticking toward 3 a.m. when I finally cut the clear packing tape on the manila envelope. Inside were 3 documents, neatly organized. The first was a certified copy of a quitclaim deed. My hand started to shake as I read the legal description. It was dated 4 months before Julian's accident. It transferred full ownership of our cottage, the woods, the entire 3-acre parcel, from the Vance Family Trust to Fiona A. Vance. My name. For 3 years, Eleanor had held this house over my head like a guillotine. Every holiday, every dinner, she would remind me how lucky I was that the Vances allowed me to stay on family land. She'd used the threat of homelessness to keep me quiet. And all this time, the land was mine. Julian had seen the sharks circling long before he died. He had built me a fortress. The second document was a printout from a private bank portal. It showed the blue account Maya had mentioned, a college savings plan with a balance of over $47,000. But there was a red line drawn through a series of recent transactions. Over the last 18 months, there had been 6 withdrawals. Each one was routed to an account ending in the digits 4402. I didn't need a detective to tell me whose account that was. 4402 was the Vance real estate operating account. He wasn't just reallocating Maya's future, he was using it to prop up a failing business while buying luxury boats. The third item was a handwritten note on yellow paper. Julian's blocky print. Clara, if you're reading this, they've started. Eleanor doesn't know about the deed yet. Neither does Silas. I've left a secondary file with Nathan Corderero in Portland. He has the receipts for the Mercer Project taxes. Don't let them tell you whose ground you're standing on. It's yours. Build your walls high. I stood up and walked to the window. I thought about Eleanor standing in her silk robe, telling me about structure. I thought about Silas laughing while my daughter starved in a corner. They thought I was a night shift nurse who could be frightened into submission with a cardboard sign. They had no idea I was standing on the only piece of solid ground they couldn't touch. I picked up my laptop and logged into the county property records. I typed in our address. The screen loaded, mocking my impatience. Then, it snapped into focus. Owner of record, Fiona A. Vance. But then, my eyes caught something else. A line beneath the tax assessment. A homestead exemption had been filed for the current year. I hadn't filed one. I clicked the icon to view the application. The name on the digital signature wasn't mine. It was Judith Eleanor Vance. I stared at the screen, a new kind of chill radiating from my spine. Eleanor hadn't just lied about owning the land. She had been using my house, my primary residence, to claim a massive tax break for herself for the last 3 years. She was committing state tax fraud using my front door. I looked at the cardboard sign sitting on my kitchen counter. Family disgrace. I pulled out my phone and searched for Nathan Corderero. I left a message on his machine, my voice low and cold. This is Clara Vance. I have the files Julian left. I need to talk to you about a structural failure in the Vance family. I was about to put the phone down when a new notification pinged. It was a social media alert. My sister-in-law, Karen, had just posted to the town's community page. Heartbroken tonight, the post read. Some people use the holidays to spread lies and alienate a loving grandmother from her only grandchild. Please pray for Eleanor as she navigates this painful family betrayal. Family must come first. Attached was a photo of Eleanor sitting by her fireplace, looking frail and distraught. The comments were already pouring in. Shame on her, one local wrote. After all the Vances have done for this town. I looked at the photo, then at the deed on my table, then at the bedroom where my daughter was sleeping. The trap was set. They were already turning the town against me, playing the victims before I could even take a breath. I didn't reply to the post. I didn't defend myself. I just opened a new folder on my desktop and labeled it, Red. I started by uploading the photo of Maya with the sign. Then the deed. Then the tax fraud filing. I was halfway through when my phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. I saw what happened through the window, Clara. I have the video. Call me when you're ready to burn it down. The unknown number sat on my screen like a live wire. In a town like Miller's Cove, everyone has a neighbor, but few people have a witness. I stared at the message, the light of the phone reflecting off the quitclaim deed Julian had left for me. My husband hadn't just left me a house. He'd left me a battlefield, and the Vances were already marching across the borders. I didn't reply to the text. Not yet. In the ER, you don't move until you've stabilized the airway. I needed to know exactly how deep the rot went before I started cutting. The next morning, the silence in our cottage was heavy. Maya was awake, sitting at the kitchen table in her pajamas, staring at a bowl of cereal she hadn't touched. The disgrace sign was gone, hidden in the red folder on my laptop, but the shadow of it was written in the slump of her shoulders. Maya, I said, sitting across from her. I need you to tell me exactly what you heard Silas say on the phone. Every word. She looked up, her eyes searching mine for a trace of the judgment she'd received at the matter. Finding none, she leaned in. He said the Mercer project was bleeding him dry. He told someone named Voss that if they didn't move the funds from the blue account by January, the auditors would see the gap. He said, Beatrice is a ghost, and Clara is too distracted to notice a missing line item. Beatrice. My heart skipped. Beatrice was Julian's aunt, a woman who had died 10 years ago and left a massive trust that Silas supposedly managed for the benefit of the town. I grabbed my legal pad. Silas wasn't just stealing from a 10-year-old. He was using Maya's college fund to plug holes in a much larger embezzlement scheme involving a deceased relative's estate. He was playing a shell game with dead people's money, and he'd assumed I was too busy cleaning up trauma bays to read a ledger. You did the right thing, Maya, I whispered. You found the crack in the wall. I spent the next 3 hours at my kitchen table, a pot of black coffee and a mountain of Julian's old files between me and the world. I found it in a folder labeled HC Tax Recap. Julian had been tracking the Vance real estate holdings for years. Silas had been inflating the value of the Mercer project, a supposed low-income housing development, to secure bank loans, while the actual land was nothing but an empty salt marsh. He was underwater. The sloop, the manor, the bespoke suits, it was all a facade built on a foundation of shifting sand. And Maya had accidentally poked her finger through the drywall. By noon, the digital siege had begun. Karen Vance's Facebook post had been shared over 100 times. The comments were a masterclass in small-town gaslighting. Clara was always a bit of an outsider. Poor Eleanor, losing her son was enough, now she loses her granddaughter to spite? I heard the night shifts are finally getting to her. The phone rang. It was Tanya from the hospital. Her voice was strained. Clara, look, the chief of nursing saw the posts. There's talk about conduct unbecoming. People are calling the front desk, saying they don't want an unstable nurse near their families. You might want to take a few personal days. Tanya, you know me, I said, my voice cracking despite my best efforts. You were in Bay 4 with me last night. Did I look unstable? I know that, Clara. But Eleanor Vance just donated the new pediatric wing. The optics they're bad. I hung up. They weren't just trying to take my reputation, they were moving for my livelihood. If I couldn't work, I couldn't pay Nathan Corderero. If I couldn't pay Nathan, I couldn't fight the deed. It was a classic pincer move. I looked at the unknown number again. I saw what happened through the window. I hit dial. The voice that answered was raspy, aged, and familiar. It was Mrs. Gable, the woman who lived in the small gardener's cottage adjacent to the Vance manor. She'd been the Vance's housekeeper for 40 years before Silas retired her without a pension. Clara, she said, no preamble. I was out on my porch smoking when they brought that poor lamb outside. Silas was laughing, but Eleanor was hissing at her like a snake. She made that girl stand on the stone porch in the wind for 20 minutes before they let her back into the dining room. I caught it on my phone. I wanted to scream, but I knew they'd just call me a senile old drunk. Can you send it to me? I asked, my hand shaking. I already sent it to your email. And Clara? Check the sub-basement files Julian kept. Silas thinks he's a lion, but he's just a scavenger. He's been skimming from the town's harbor fund for a decade. I checked my inbox. The video was 23 seconds of pure cruelty. You could hear Eleanor's voice clearly over the Maine wind. You will stay out here until you learn that the Vances own the truth in this town, not you. I didn't cry. I felt a cold, crystalline calm settle over me. I had the deed. I had the tax fraud. I had the embezzlement trail. And now, I had the video. Eleanor wanted to play the loving grandmother on Facebook? Fine. I was going to give her a reality check that would break the internet. At 2 p.m. on December 26th, I walked into Nathan Corderero's office in Portland. The hallways smelled of old leather and sourdough from the bakery downstairs. Nathan was a man who looked like he'd been carved out of a piece of Maine granite, no nonsense, deep-set eyes, and a desk that was surgically clean. I didn't start with my feelings. I started with the documents. I am the owner of record for 26 Birchwood, I said, laying the quitclaim deed on his desk. My mother-in-law has been filing fraudulent homestead exemptions on this property for 3 years. My brother-in-law has withdrawn $47,000 from my daughter's 529 account to fund his real estate business. And last night, they physically and emotionally abused my daughter to keep her quiet about it. I slid my phone across the desk. I played the video. Nathan didn't move a muscle as he watched. When it finished, he looked up, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something human in his eyes. Anger. Virginia and Maine have different statutes, but tax fraud is universal, Nathan said, his voice a low rumble. If Eleanor Vance signed those exemptions, she's facing felony charges. And Silas, if he's commingling trust funds with personal business, he's not just looking at a lawsuit. He's looking at a prison cell. I don't want a settlement, Nathan, I said. I want them off my land. I want the money back in Maya's account. And I want the town to know exactly who they've been praying for. Nathan leaned back, tapping a silver pen against his chin. We could go slow. We could file a civil suit and wait for discovery. No, I said. I'm an ER nurse. We don't wait for the infection to spread. We debride the wound. I like your style, Clara, Nathan said. He pulled a fresh legal pad forward. Here's how we play it. First, we file a formal complaint with the county assessor regarding the fraud. That's the match. Then, we send a notice to vacate to Silas for the workshop he keeps on your property. That's the fuel. He looked at me over his glasses. And the video? We save that for the grand finale. But first, we need to address the family disgrace sign. In the state of Maine, that constitutes a very specific type of emotional distress and child endangerment. I left his office with a stack of signed authorizations and a sense of purpose that felt like armor. But as I walked to my car, my phone buzzed again. It was a notification from the school's parent portal. A formal complaint has been filed regarding your daughter's behavioral outburst at a private event. A mandatory meeting with Child Protective Services has been requested by a family member to assess the home environment. Eleanor wasn't just trying to shame me. She was trying to take Maya. I looked at the brick building of the law office, then at the gray Portland sky. The Vances had spent 50 years building their walls. They had no idea I was the one who knew exactly where the structural supports were, and I was about to pull the first one. The office of Nathan Corderero felt like the only solid thing in a world made of shifting fog. Outside, the Portland rain turned to sleet, rattling against the window panes like a handful of gravel. Nathan didn't look at the Facebook comments. He didn't care about the pediatric wing or the Vance name. He looked at the deed, then at the tax filings, and finally at the video Mrs. Gable had sent. Clara, he said, his voice a low, rhythmic thrum. In the legal world, there is a concept called unclean hands. It means you can't ask a court for justice when you're standing in the middle of a crime. Your mother-in-law hasn't just been mean, she's been stealing from the state to pay for the very roof she's trying to take from you. He pulled a fresh stack of cream-colored vellum from his drawer. This wasn't a suggestion, it was an opening statement. Eleanor Vance has been claiming a primary residence tax exemption on 26 Birchwood for 3 years. To do that, she had to swear under penalty of perjury that she lives in your house. That is a felony. And Silas? He's been using Maya's 529 funds to bridge the gap in a harbor development project that doesn't even have a foundation. Nathan leaned forward, his eyes as sharp as a scalpel. She wants a meeting with Child Protective Services? Fine. We'll give her one. But she won't be the one asking the questions. We're filing a formal report of child endangerment and emotional abuse today. And tonight, we're serving Silas with a 30-day notice to vacate the storage workshop he keeps on the back of your property. He thinks he owns the soil, Clara. It's time he finds out he's just a squatter. I felt a cold, crystalline strength settle into my bones. For 3 years, I had been the quiet daughter-in-law. I had swallowed the insults and the side-eyes because I thought I was a guest in my own life. But as Nathan's stamp hit the first document with a heavy, final thud, I realized I wasn't just surviving. I was the architect of the Vance family's demolition. The morning of December 28th arrived with a biting, salt-crusted wind. I spent the early hours at the local post office, a place that smelled of damp wool and old paper. I set 3 white envelopes on the counter, each one addressed in Nathan's crisp, legal type. One for the county assessor. One for the Department of Health and Human Services. And one for Silas Vance. Certified mail, I told the clerk. Return receipt requested. The sound of the date stamp hitting those envelopes was the most satisfying noise I'd heard since Maya's birth. It was the sound of the trap closing. By the time I walked back to my car, my phone was already vibrating with a new wave of notifications. The Facebook post had morphed. Now, people were organizing a vigil for Eleanor, the poor woman whose heart was being broken by a cold-blooded nurse. I didn't engage. I drove to the hospital instead. I walked into the chief of nursing's office before she could even take off her coat. I didn't wait for her to start the talk about optics. I laid the video of the porch incident on her desk, and beside it, the document showing Silas's embezzlement from the pediatric fund he'd claimed to bequeath. "I'm not the one who's a liability to this hospital, Diane," I said, my voice as level as a heartbeat on a monitor. "The Vance SR. And if you ask me to take one more day of personal leave because of a smear campaign run by a woman committing tax fraud, my next call won't be to my lawyer. It will be to the local news." The silence in that office was absolute. Diane looked at the screen, then at me. For the first time, the Vance influence evaporated, replaced by the sheer, undeniable weight of evidence. "Go back to your floor, Clara," she whispered. "And tell the front desk to stop taking calls regarding your family. We're done with the Vance circle." I walked to the ER, my head high, the blue scrubs feeling like armor. But the real battle was waiting at home. When I pulled into my driveway at 7 p.m., a black SUV was idling near my mailbox. Silas was leaning against the hood, his jaw tight, a manila envelope, the one I'd sent, crumpled in his fist. "What the hell is this, Clara?" Silas's voice was a jagged shriek, stripped of its usual polished baritone. He shook the notice to vacate at me like a weapon. "You're throwing me off family land? You're accusing my mother of fraud? Do you have any idea how much we've done for you?" I didn't get out of the car. I rolled down the window just enough to let the cold Maine air bridge the gap. "It's not family land, Silas. It's mine. Julian made sure of that. And your mother didn't do anything for me. She used my home to steal $10,000 from the county." "You're unstable," he hissed, stepping closer. "We have the CPS report. They're coming tomorrow. You think a court is going to listen to an overworked, grieving nurse over the judge's son? We'll have Maya in the manor by New Year's, and you'll be in a psych ward. The judge's son shouldn't have put his gambling debts on his niece's college ledger, Silas," I said. I pulled my phone out and hit play on a recording I'd made of our phone call from an hour prior. His own voice filled the driveway. "If you don't drop the deed claim, I'll make sure you never see a dime of that 529 money again. I've already moved it." Silas froze. In the state of Maine, we are a one-party consent state for recordings. He had just handed me a confession of intent to embezzle. "The CPS worker isn't coming to see me, Silas," I said, my voice dropping into a terrifying calm. "They're coming to see Eleanor. Because I'm a mandated reporter, and I've officially filed a report for the 23 minutes of footage I have of your mother abusing my child in the freezing wind." The blood didn't just leave his face, it seemed to evaporate. He looked at the cottage, then at me, and for the first time, the lion was gone. He looked like a scavenger caught in the high beams. "Check the mail again on Monday, Silas," I added. "There's a second letter. It's a formal audit of the Mercer project. Nathan found the shell accounts. It's over." I rolled up the window, put the car in park, and sat there until he finally got back in his SUV and peeled away, his tires kicking up a spray of gray slush. I walked into my house, where the Christmas lights were still blinking in the window. Maya was sitting on the couch with Mrs. Gable, who had brought over a plate of cookies and a sense of fierce, grandmotherly protection. I sat down beside my daughter, took her hand, and for the first time in 3 years, the house didn't feel like a borrowed space. "It's our ground, Maya," I whispered. "From the foundation to the sky. It's ours." The big reveal was yet to come. The moment the town saw the video, but as I looked at the red folder on my screen, I knew that the Vance walls were finally beginning to crumble. The only thing left was to see who was left standing when the dust settled. The sleet had turned into a thick, bone-chilling fog by the time the knock came. Not the aggressive, rhythmic pounding of a Vance, but the steady, official rap of someone with a clipboard and a badge. It was 9 a.m. on December 29th. The Child Protective Services caseworker, a woman named Ms. Vance, no relation, though the irony tasted like copper, stood on my porch. She had the weary, impenetrable eyes of someone who had seen the worst of humanity and survived it. "I'm here regarding a cross report, Ms. Vance," she said, stepping into my warm kitchen. "One filed by Eleanor Vance regarding this household, and one filed by you, regarding hers." I didn't lead with my heart. I led with the red folder. I sat her at the table, the same spot where Maya had stood shivering just days ago, and I showed her the video. 23 seconds. In the quiet of my kitchen, the sound of the wind on the recording was a roar. Then came Eleanor's voice, sharp enough to cut glass. "You're a Vance, Maya. And Vances don't tell tales. Stand there until you're as cold as the lies you tell." I watched the caseworker's jaw tighten. She didn't look away. She watched it 3 times. Then she looked at the family disgrace sign I had preserved in a Ziploc bag. "She's 10, I said, my voice a jagged whisper. She was hungry. It was 28 degrees. And she was punished for asking where her college tuition went." The caseworker stood up and walked to the living room where Maya was reading. I watched through the doorway as the official assessment turned into a conversation between 2 humans. Maya didn't exaggerate. She didn't cry. She simply told the truth. And in Miller's Cove, the truth was finally becoming the most dangerous weapon in the room. The countdown to the new year wasn't marked by champagne in our house. It was marked by the sound of a diesel engine idling in my driveway. On December 31st, Silas showed up with a hitch on his truck, ready to haul away the storage workshop on the back of my land. He thought he was taking his toys and leaving me with the wreckage. He didn't know that Nathan Corderero had spent the morning at the courthouse. I walked out to the gravel drive, my breath hitching in the frozen air. Silas was tossing power tools into the back of his truck, his face a mask of red-veined fury. "You think you won, Clara?" He spat, not looking at me. "You take the house, you take the land. But you're still just a nurse. You'll be broke by February trying to heat this place. We're done with you." "You're right about one thing, Silas," I said, leaning against the porch railing. "We are done." I held up my phone. I wasn't recording this time. I was showing him a live feed from the Henley County Sheriff's portal. "The workshop stays," I said. "Nathan filed an emergency injunction this morning. Since that structure was built using funds reallocated from Maya's 529 account, it's been seized as a physical asset pending the embezzlement trial." Silas froze, a circular saw halfway to his tailgate. "And Silas?" I added, stepping off the porch. "The sheriff is 2 minutes away. You were served a notice to vacate the property, not just the building. You're currently trespassing on land owned by Fiona A. Vance. If you're still here when that cruiser rounds the bend, I'm pressing charges." The silence that followed was broken only by the distant wail of a siren. Silas looked at the workshop, then at me, and I saw it. The exact moment he realized that the distracted nurse had officially outplayed the brilliant developer. He dropped the saw. It hit the gravel with a heavy, metallic thud. He didn't even close his tailgate. He got into his truck and peeled away, the tire screaming against the ice, leaving his empire behind in a cloud of exhaust and failure. By the first week of January, the fog had cleared, leaving the Maine coast sharp and unforgiving. Nathan Corderero sat in my kitchen, a mountain of bank records spread across the oak table like a deck of cards. "We got the full audit on the 529, Clara," Nathan said, his pen hovering over a line item from last July. It wasn't just boat payments. Silas was using Maya's money to pay the interest on a high-risk loan he took out to save the Mercer project. He's been funneling cash through 3 different shell companies. He turned the page, and there it was. A transfer of $42,800. "The big reveal isn't just the theft," Nathan whispered. "It's the recipient. The money wasn't just going to Silas's business. It was going to pay off a private investigator." I felt the air leave my lungs. "A private investigator? For what?" "For you, Clara. Silas has been paying someone for 2 years to follow you. He was looking for any slip-up, any late night, any unstable moment he could use to prove you were an unfit mother so he could regain control of the deed Julian left you." I stared at the ledger. $42,000 of my daughter's future spent trying to dismantle her mother. The weight of it hit me then, the sheer, calculated cruelty of the people I had called family. They hadn't just been waiting for me to fail, they had been subsidizing it with my own daughter's education fund. "The wage garnishment starts Monday," Nathan said, his voice firm. "We're attaching Silas's personal accounts and placing a lien on the Vance matter itself to recover the fraud penalties Eleanor owes the state. They're not just losing the fight, Clara. They're losing the floor." I looked at the red folder, now thick with court orders and forensic accounting. I thought about the family disgrace sign. I thought about the 23 seconds of freezing wind. I wasn't a ghost in this house anymore. I was the one holding the ledger. And the Vances were finally about to find out exactly what happens when the distracted nurse stops saving lives and starts balancing the books. The silence in the Vance matter was no longer the quiet of high society poise, it was the suffocating stillness of a tomb. The phone rang at 6:02 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was sitting at the kitchen table, the red folder finally closed and tucked into the drawer. I didn't need to check the caller ID to know the frequency of the vibration. It was the frantic, uneven pulse of someone who had run out of moves. "Clara," Eleanor's voice was a ghost of its former self. Gone was the honeyed gravel, the regal condescension of the Vance matriarch. She sounded like a woman who had spent the last 48 hours staring at a $10,500 tax bill and a substantiated CPS report. "Clara, please. I'm a 62-year-old woman. I've lost my son. You can't mean to do this. You can't mean to take Maya from me." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't offer her the satisfaction of my anger. I sat in the house Julian had bought for me, on the land that was legally mine, and I spoke the truth into the receiver. "I'm not taking Maya from you, Eleanor," I said, my voice as steady as a heart monitor. "I'm protecting her from you. Those are not the same thing. You stood on that porch and watched a 10-year-old shiver because she dared to tell the truth about your son's theft. You didn't see a grandchild. You saw a liability." "It was a mistake," she whispered, a sob catching in her throat. I was tired. Silas was. Silas was under so much pressure. Pressure doesn't justify a family disgrace sign, Eleanor. And it doesn't justify felony tax fraud. If you want to see Maya again, you won't call this number. You'll complete the court-ordered counseling. You'll sit in a room with a professional, not your pastor, not your friends. And you will explain exactly why you thought a child's dignity was a fair price for a boat payment. You're being cold, Clara. Julian would be. Julian is the one who left me the deed, Eleanor. He's the one who left the trail. He knew exactly who you were. He didn't leave me a legacy, he left me a shield. And I'm finally picking it up." I hung up. The call lasted 47 seconds. I timestamped it, added it to the digital log, and realized that for the first time in 3 years, the weight of the Vance name didn't feel like it was crushing my chest. In the quiet that followed the call, I went back to Julian's box. There was one last envelope at the very bottom, one I hadn't been ready to touch on Christmas Eve. It was sealed with heavy wax, and in his blocky print, it said, "For Maya, on her 18th birthday." I broke my own rule. I broke the seal. I sat on the floor of the hallway, the winter moon reflecting off the snow outside, and read my husband's voice from the grave. "Maya Bug, if you're reading this, you're an adult, and I'm likely not there to see the woman you've become. But I need you to know something. You come from a family that values the appearance of the house more than the people inside it. Don't let them convince you that your worth is tied to their name. Your mom is the toughest person I've ever met. She spent her life saving people who couldn't save themselves, and I've spent mine making sure that when the Vances finally show their teeth, she has the ground to stand on. Trust her. She is your anchor. And remember, the truth is the only inheritance that can't be garnished." I didn't cry for the Julian I lost. I cried for the Julian who had loved us enough to fight a war he wouldn't live to see. I refolded the letter and placed it in Maya's memory box, next to her first drawing and her 5th grade diploma. The Vances had spent 30 years trying to curate a legacy of perfection. Julian had spent 4 months ensuring a legacy of bravery. I knew which one would survive the winter. Spring arrived in Miller's Cove not with a roar, but with the persistent, rhythmic drip of melting ice. The dogwoods were beginning to bud, their white blossoms promising a world that was new again. The Mercer project was dead. Silas's wages were being garnished, his reputation dissolved by the forensic audit that Nathan had made public. Eleanor had retreated to a small cottage in the next county, the manor sold to cover the back taxes and the legal fees of a dynasty in collapse. The social media vigil had ended months ago, the community moving on to the next scandal, leaving the Vances as a cautionary tale of greed and cardboard signs. Maya and I spent the Saturday morning in the old workshop on the back of our land. We had spent the winter scrubbing away the motor oil and the sawdust of Silas's occupation. We had painted the walls a soft, sea glass blue. We called it the Anchor. It wasn't a storage unit anymore, it was Maya's art studio. I watched her through the window, her tongue poked out in concentration as she painted a landscape of the cliffs. She wasn't shivering. She wasn't wearing a sign. She was wearing an old t-shirt of Julian's, and she was laughing at a joke Mrs. Gable had told her while bringing over a pitcher of lemonade. I looked at the family disgrace sign one last time. It was sitting in the fire pit in the backyard. I struck a match and watched the cardboard curl and blacken, the thick letters disappearing into the Maine sky. We weren't just the Vance widows anymore. We weren't the distracted nurse and the unstable child. We were the owners of the ground. We were the builders of the light. I walked back into my house, and checked the kitchen clock. I had a shift starting in 2 hours. But for the first time in my career, I wasn't running away from a broken life. I was leaving a home that was finally, irrevocably, ours. The Christmas lights by the front door were still up. I hadn't taken them down. Maya said they reminded her that even the longest night eventually ends. I reached out and flicked the switch, watching the small, steady glow hold its own against the fading afternoon. "We're okay, Julian," I whispered to the salt air. "The foundation is holding."
Thank you for watching. Subscribe Family Files for more.